I did my presentation on Devil's Knot, and I'm going to start off with a kind of opener. If I can get my computer to work. There we go. And it says, could you imagine being a normal teenager one day, and the next day you are being arrested for the murder of 3 8-year-old boys? Devil's Knot is the true story about the West Memphis Three and how 3 innocent teenagers were wrongfully convicted. This happened to Damien Eccles, Jason Misskelley Jr., and Jason Baldwin. On May 3, 1993, 3 8-year-old boys from West Memphis, Arkansas were reported missing and found the next day submerged in a creek close to their houses. When the bodies had been found, they were bound, tortured, and one castrated. Investigators were stumped on how a crime like this could happen in a small town like West Memphis, and they spent the next few weeks thoroughly investigating the crime and trying to come up with suspects on who could have committed the murders. Before the bodies were discovered, the only piece of evidence found was a shoe belonging to one of the boys. Sergeant Allen went into the water, and it was then the first naked body of a child came to the surface. Michael Moore was found first, and he had his left foot bound to his left wrist and his right foot bound to his right wrist. Investigators then entered the creek and began looking for the other 2 boys. It was within a few minutes that the other 2 boys had been found, but it was discovered that Christopher Byers had been castrated and mutilated. Investigators believe the murders were some form of a satanic ritual performed. The investigators went on for weeks with tips leading to dead ends, but it wasn't until Jerry Driver brought the attention to Damien Eccles. Eccles was interviewed on May 7th, just 2 days after the body discovery, and was released after his questioning. Jason Misskelley Jr. was brought in on June 3rd for questioning, and he confessed to the crimes before recanting his confession. He stated that he had been afraid of police, coerced into confessing, and did not understand his Miranda rights when they were read to him. Eccles was under police surveillance because he was thought to have an interest in occultism, and Detective Jones believed that Eccles was capable of murdering children. It was believed that Eccles self-incriminated himself by telling investigators that one of the children had been mutilated, but that information had never been released to the press. How did Eccles know? On June 3rd, investigators turned their attention to Jesse Misskelley Jr. and interrogated him for 12 hours, with only 46 minutes being recorded. During one of the 2 recorded sessions, Misskelley confessed to the murders, but later recanted because he claimed he was afraid of the police, did not understand his Miranda rights, and he felt intimidated, coerced, and suffered from fatigue. In 1996, the Arkansas Supreme Court ruled in favor of the investigators and stated that Misskelley did, in fact, understand his Miranda rights and that his confession was voluntary. It wasn't until after Misskelley's confession that investigators arrested Eccles and Baldwin. When the trials began to roll around for Eccles, Misskelley and Baldwin, Misskelley had a separate trial than Eccles and Baldwin did. Misskelley had a witness testify that his confession and interrogation was a classic example of police coercion, and another stated that his different confessions did not line up with the other one. Regardless of the police misconduct, Misskelley was found guilty in February of 1994 prison with an extra 40 years. His charges were 1 count first-degree murder and 2 counts second-degree murder. Eccles and Baldwin went on trial 3 weeks after Misskelley and were found guilty of 3 counts of murder. Eccles was sentenced to death, and Baldwin was given life in prison. All 3 boys spent 17 years in prison before new evidence was brought forth, and they entered into an Alford plea while still claiming their innocence. It was on August 19, 2011, that Eccles, Baldwin, and Misskelley were released from prison, and although they did not receive a full exoneration, the judge agreed to their Alford pleas and agreed to time served and suspended the rest of their sentence. When I first read this book, I was shocked. I couldn't believe about the police misconduct, and although I'd heard the case before, I hadn't looked into the evidence or the facts. But it made me not trust the CJ system as much as I used to. Considering the severe lack of evidence, it was stated that Eccles was a bit odd and not in good graces with those in town. Miss Kelly was known as suffering from a mild case of retardation and had a low IQ number. And Baldwin was friends with Miss Kelly and Eccles, and they all hung out together. And investigators believe that they were all capable of murder if they hung out together. And in my honest, humble opinion, I believe Byers' stepfather was guilty of murdering them. The many different types of police misconduct in class really, really shocks me because it happens every day, even in this small town. Miss Kelly was coerced into confessing to the murders while being questioned. All three of them were intimidated into confessing. There was police corruption and psychological abuse. Miss Kelly was interrogated for 12 hours without sleep or parental consent. As far as Vicki Hutcherson is concerned, don't like her. Not at all. She wanted her 5 minutes of fame, and she coerced her son into making a false statement against Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Kelly. I believe a utilitarian would go along with their statement because they wanted the greatest outcome for the case, which would be having it solved, and Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Kelly serving time in prison for the murders, even if they were innocent. I believe an ethical formalist would go along with her statement as well, because they want the murders to be solved to allow the 3 8-year-olds to be able to rest in peace, knowing their murder was solved. I don't trust anything she said because in 2007, she recanted her statement and basically said that she coerced her son into it as well. As far as question 5 goes, Miss Kelly was 16 at the time of his interrogation, and by law, he has to have a parent or legal guardian with him during questioning. His father gave investigators permission to question him, or to bring him to the police station, but not permission to interrogate him. The problems that arose from the improper interrogation technique was they got a falsified confession from Miss Kelly, and he recanted because he didn't understand his Miranda rights. I mean, he had an IQ score of 78. So I don't understand how he could possibly understand the Miranda rights when I'm almost 27 and can't understand them sometimes. The many different types of prosecutorial and judicial misconduct in class we covered was shocking as well, but learning about it in this book, the fact that the judge and prosecutor chose to get their information from eyewitnesses instead of the evidence against Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Kelly, they chose to try Miss Kelly as an adult despite the fact that he had mental instabilities and low IQ scores. And just a penny for your thought, I do believe that investigators should have questioned John Mark Byers, but he was kind of in the police, he was in the investigators' pockets. He had some run-ins with them from his first marriage, threatened his ex-wife, and became very close to investigators in West Memphis. Therefore, he was in their pockets. I do believe that the defense attorneys chose not to put up a stronger fight for Eccles, Baldwin, and Miss Kelly because they thought that the evidence they had against them was sufficient enough to be able to try them and make sure that they were able to be released. I don't understand why they couldn't have fought better for them. And based on what I learned about prosecutorial and judicial misconduct, everyone that was involved in this case chose not to investigate it properly. In one part, I read that it took them 6 days after the bodies were found to go back and test the banks for blood of each 8-year-old boy or even evidence from Damian Eccles, Jesse Miss Kelly Jr., or even Jason Baldwin. I really enjoyed this book, learning a little bit more about what the West Memphis 3 and what they went through. I was very thankful that new evidence came forward and they were able to get out of prison, especially since Damien had spent 17 years on death row. And I'm not sure if the evidence, even though the evidence has proved that they were innocent, I don't think they realize what they've done to these people. Hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.